Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. This is the podcast where we talk to experts from around the world on communication, leadership, diversity, and really how you can show up better in your career to advance to get the results that you need. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host. Today, we are talking to Ivna Curi of the Assertiveness.com. But before I get into the description of Ivna, who's a very interesting person, I'd like to invite you to see where you are strong with your presentation skills and where maybe not. You can take our free 4-minute assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where your presentation skills are strong and helping you, and where perhaps a little bit of support could get you the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. Ivna Curi does very much what I do. She helps women speak up and be assertive rather than aggressive. She is the CEO and founder of Assertiveness.com, which is a company designed to help organizations advance professional women by training them on how to speak up with assertive communication without coming across as aggressive or difficult, to help them be taken seriously, be respected, and contribute at a higher capacity. Ivna's company provides talks, experiential workshops, and trainings, both online and in person. She has an MBA from INSEAD, that's the French School of Management, and it's actually the most leading business school outside the USA. She also has an electrical engineering degree. She's a Forbes contributor. She has lived and worked and managed teams around the world on 4 of the 7 continents, from Fortune 500 companies such as Johnson & Johnson, A.T. Kearney, and Etihad Airways. She also gets excited about hiking, interior design, and experiencing difficult cultures. What I really love about working with Ivna and listening to Ivna is that she is full of great specific advice and concrete suggestions on what you can do to claim your power, be more assertive, and rise in your organization. I think you'll enjoy this conversation. Here comes Ivna Curi. Ivna Curi, welcome to Speakers Who Get Results.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, I'm so glad you and I do much what we talk about, very much the same sort of thing in slightly different language. So I thought this would be really fun for us to trade ideas and tips and things like that. First of all, though, I'd like to ask you, who would be your dream interview? If you could interview someone who's no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
When I grew up, when I was a small girl, I loved scientists. I wanted to be a scientist myself. So I read some bios of famous scientists, and I really identified with, Albert Einstein.
Okay. Why?
Well, initially it was because of his science, but over the years, I realized that he did a lot of work around and thinking and writing around human thinking and problem solving and humanity, and speaking up as well, and that right to be able to express your thoughts and ideas, which I thought is generally very empowering and also aligned with what I teach.
So what would you ask him?
I would ask him, what would he recommend, that people do? Because he went through a period of war, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you couldn't really speak up, you couldn't really talk about science, and it was very challenging to bring some of those topics up. And there was a lot of discrimination. So I would ask him, hey, what would you recommend for those people who feel, discriminated, or that as if they speak up and they express their thoughts, they might experience backlash like he did and many
Mm-hmm.
others did during his time.
Okay. Well, I'm particularly excited. You have a wonderful podcast called Speak Your Mind Unapologetically. And I love that. And you say you give out these tips all the time. They're very useful and very constructive. I've learned a few things from you, definitely. And first, I'd like to ask you, how did you get from Brazil, where you were born, to the Middle East, to America in a corporate job, to finally working for yourself to help women learn how to speak up?
Thank you for asking that question. It was a journey. I really wanted to just be a great engineer and scientist when I was a young girl in Brazil. I managed to get myself into the top engineering school, which is the Institute of Aeronautics of Brazil. So it's linked to the Air Force.
Aeronautics is in American
Aeronautics.
English. Yes.
There you go. Thank you. And from there, I had the opportunity and the exposure to see that there were, a couple of people that were getting some opportunities abroad.
Mm-hmm.
And so because the school is relatively well known in Brazil, I decided then to look for an opportunity abroad as well. And we did have some people that studied in the school that had opportunities in different countries. And there was actually a position in the US at the time at Johnson & Johnson, the consumer good headquarters. And I got the job, and that started my international exploration. And from there, I went on to study in Singapore and France at INSEAD. And then from there, I took a job in the Middle East, in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. I spent about 7 years there. And it's a wonderful place, UAE, because it's incredibly multicultural. And you work with people from all over the world. And it really challenges your thinking around what is right and what is wrong, because you get so much exposure. And then when we decided, me and my husband, I met my husband there, when we decided to come back to the US, I started to think about what I really wanted out of my career, because back during my MBA, I had already defined what I really wanted, what I was passionate about. And I wanted to create a school for life skills that most people did not learn at school or from their parents or from their employers or even from universities. And there were so many of these life skills that I wish I had learned. And I thought that would make life so much better rather than some of these very specific things that we learn. So I thought, okay, what is the one life skill that would have made the biggest difference in my life, but that would also have helped a lot of the people that I worked with, that I mentored, and my staff in the past? And that's when I came up with assertiveness. And what's brilliant about it is that I knew what assertiveness was because I had a wonderful mentor and boss early in my career who taught me exactly how to be assertive. And he showed me that it wasn't aggressive. He was my role model. He was the most assertive boss that I ever had, mentor that I ever had. So it's wonderful when you have a role model and you see that it's not aggressive, that it's very powerful and strong and respectful and even caring. But most people don't understand that. And so I'm bringing that to the world and helping clarify and explain exactly what assertiveness is and how it works and how it can help improve people's lives, especially women's career.
Well, that's what takes me to my next question, which is, I love that you reframe it as assertive. So often women are thought to be aggressive when we stand up for ourselves, when we speak our mind, speak our truth. So how can, and that of course gets in the way of being promoted, because people say, oh, wow, she's really great, but yeah, she's kind of pushy. Don't think we want her in the department, or we think we want her at that level. How can women be assertive and deal with the backlash of people saying that's too aggressive?
And that's a great question, because as women, we do need to think about that, as it is a reality. We know from several studies that there's a likability penalty for women when they are what people call too assertive, but there's no such thing as too assertive. What they mean is too pushy or aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And often when we think of an assertive woman, we think of that difficult, I'm just going to go and take over, and it's all about what I say, and you listen to me, and I'm powerful. But that's not the case, right? And so the first thing is that women need to understand what assertiveness is and how it differs from aggressiveness. And then second, learn to implement assertiveness in a way that feels right for them, which can be highly empathetic, very warm, considerate, caring. These are not exclusive. Mm-hmm. You can be both highly assertive and highly warm and caring and considerate. And that is actually the best combination for women and women leaders.
Then how do you define the difference between assertive and aggressive?
Yeah, so this is incredibly important for the audience to hear, both men and women, but especially women. Assertiveness is the skill of communicating what you need, what you want, what your thoughts are, what your likes and dislikes are, what your boundaries are, how you feel, negotiating, communicating anything that you need to communicate in a way that is entirely respectful, that is calm, and that is effective. Because there's no point in just saying stuff and then not getting any results from it, right? Because at the end of the day, when you communicate assertively, you have an expectation that somebody is going to change their thinking, their behaviors, or how they interact with you. And that requires influence. And that's why this is a skill.
Mm-hmm.
And being aggressive is about expressing yourself in a way that is disrespectful.
Aha. Okay. Respectful versus disrespectful. Okay. So keep going.
And so when you're aggressive, you're attempting to control other people. Your goal is to get them to do what you want them to do in a controlling way. And it's very different than assertiveness, because assertiveness is about controlling your own behavior, what you say and how you act. It is no longer about the other person. It is about you and how you stand in the situation. And if you do well, you have a high chance of influencing other people. But when I say influence, again, that's a key word here. You're not forcing them to do things. You're not manipulating them to do things. You're giving them free will to collaborate, to be part of what you want them to be, or however you want them to respond to your assertiveness statement or what you say, where you communicate. But again, it's up to them, and you're giving them full freedom to respond as they'd like. But you're controlling yourself, and you're maximizing your chances of success by communicating effectively and respectfully.
So this is a great way to think of it. I always think of using the word enrolling somebody, like getting them to sign up to go along with you and your idea, what you want them to do. And then, of course, there will be pushback. How can we deal with pushback without being destroyed by it or obsessing about it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love the idea of enrolling. And I usually talk about inviting people to your side, which is the same thing. When you do your job right, right? When you learn how to be assertive, it'll greatly minimize conflict and pushback. And especially when you do it in an empathetic way and you add the warmth elements and you build the relationship beforehand, you do all those things and you add layers of kindness and listening and validation and all those things during your speaking up moment. But let's say they do push back after all of that. It could happen. Absolutely.
Because people do.
Because people do. Absolutely. When people push back and it's in your interest that they listen to you, then you got to assess, okay, is this worth going after? Because there's going to be a little bit of an investment in time.
Yes. Is it worth pursuing? Yes.
Is it worth pursuing? In certain situations, you might say, well, this is not worth pursuing. This company culture is not worth staying in. This boss is not worth working for. This relationship is not worth being in or investing in. And you choose to walk away. That's perfectly fine. In other situations, because we can't run away all of our lives from problems, sometimes it's best if the issue is small compared to all the other positive things that are going on, it's best to deal with it. And I usually encourage people to try to deal with it before they give up. up. And dealing with it, again, goes back to those foundational principles of assertiveness, where you need to build a little bit on that relationship part and then try again, maybe slightly differently, but maybe giving it a little bit more of the listening, of the acknowledgement, of showing people that you understand where they're coming from. And then you try again. And sometimes you just need to try multiple times. And sometimes you need to try with somebody else.
and get somebody else to tell them. Yes.
And get someone else to help you get through your messaging. Again, don't give up.
Yeah. I always think often when someone is pushing back, it might just be a reflex. So if you can catch them afterwards and get them alone in private and say, do you realize that you just undercut me in that conversation, in that meeting? And did you recognize that you did it? Because so often it's habit. I was having a conversation this morning about centuries of keeping women in a lesser role, or a role where you needed to be protected by men, because for many centuries, women had to be protected by men. That was the way the world worked, and that our business culture is evolving, but it worked for the white men of power for a long time. So changing a society is like turning a cruise ship. You can only do it a little bit at a time, and locally working with the people that you actually work with. This actually leads me into another comment that you made. The next question is about bias, and how can we recognize the bias in ourselves that keeps us quiet?
That's right. And I love that you said that. Let's recognize the bias in ourselves, not just with others. And if you take the example of pushback, sometimes for a lot of women, our first response to pushback or someone treating us in a way that we don't believe they should treat us, that we feel is wrong or disrespectful, is, oh, they're being rude. I have no fault in this. There's nothing I did here that caused this. It's all about the other person and them lacking character. And we also assume that they're never going to change, and that they want to attack us. They want to make our life difficult. They want to make things difficult for us, and they want to limit our success.
This is a story that we can tell ourselves, that we can get lost in, and then convince ourselves, because we've told ourselves that story, right?
That is absolutely true.
I've been there. Believe me, I have been there. Yes.
I've told myself many stories. I'm going to give you a quick example.
Uh-huh.
I was in this job and I wanted more exposure in meetings with senior leadership. I was doing the work, but then my boss would go and present it. And I was invisible and I wanted that visibility. And my first reaction was, well, no boss wants their employee to go to these meetings. He wants to keep power. So I probably shouldn't even ask.
Ah, yes. Okay. I know
And
that one. I know that one.
And so I spent months without asking and agonizing. And then I started telling myself another story. Well, what an inconsiderate boss. I mean, he doesn't even want to help me grow. How bad is that? Completely made up. Then, luckily, I came to my senses eventually, and I said, you know what? Let me try asking him the question and see what happens. And so I tried, and in that meeting I had scheduled to talk about this, he took over and started talking about business as usual. And again, I started telling myself another story. Well, there you go. That's proof and evidence that he is in fact a bad manager and doesn't want me to take his power. He's scared of me taking over. And he's just protecting and being self-protective. Some time went by and I said, you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. Let me try again. I had another conversation with him and I followed up maybe once or twice. And then he said, Ivna, that's a brilliant idea. In fact, I'm planning on leaving this company in the next year or so. And so, yes, I'm going to start putting you into these meetings. And eventually he did. He put me to lead meetings that he led with his superiors. Then he left and I took over.
That's good. I think, again, so much of it is awareness of how we talk to ourselves, awareness quite often if you're really angry with someone. And the truth is they don't really realize they said that hurtful thing. It was just habit, or they're not intentionally blocking you. They're just focused on other things. And it just hasn't occurred to them that you're over there wishing, unless you say something. That's where you speak up in an assertive way, right?
That's
unapologetically.
Unapologetically. And also in a way that's respectful, because then you know that you're acting in a positive way and you won't regret speaking up.
That brings me to another question. You did a wonderful podcast episode recently, so I recommend everybody you look in the show notes and check out Ivna's podcast. It's very useful. It's full of all sorts of great information. You did a good one the other day about why women don't get the credit in a team, and which fundamentally is because you're not giving too much credit to the team and no credit to yourself. It's something I talk about a lot. How can you recognize the bias that where women are not getting credit or getting more blame, and then do something about it? I think you said something about a survey, right?
Yes, there was a survey that looked at what was happening around group projects, so collaborative projects where there were men and women
and
involved.
Who was doing this?
The study?
Yeah.
I can't remember the source. I'd have to look it up.
World Economic Forum, was that?
I don't know if that one was the World Economic Forum. I'm not sure.
Anyway,
if that one.
So the study said?
The study conducted, they did this study with several companies and groups of women and men working together towards a goal, right? A project, collaborating. And what they realized is that's right. It was World Economic Forum. Now I remember. And the women consistently did not get recognized, right, for the work that was done. So the successes were credited to the men, but the failures were credited disproportionately to the women. And this was a big problem because clearly that's a losing proposition for women, right? So
keeps you from rising, from building your brand and your visibility, and from rising in your organization or in your industry.
and what's most funny is that women tend to be more collaborative than men.
Mm-hmm.
And in collaborative work, they get penalized.
Because?
And the reason is, obviously, there is this bias, right? The bias is definitely happening, but there's a lot more than that. And there are certain things that women can do to deal with this. So part of it is there's a bias that exists, and definitely often, men do get recognized more than women. But another big part is that men own their accomplishments, and they'll do a much better job in self-promoting and showing their own individual contribution within a group setting.
So by owning your accomplishment, that means saying, yes, indeed, I did this. And this is an accomplishment that I did. And this is a good thing. I did a good thing. Right?
I did a good thing.
Yeah.
Not we did. Now we all love we, it's great. Let's credit everybody. But then you end up crediting everybody and not crediting yourself. And so one of the tips I give is much better to say I and my team than to say we, because we could be absolutely anybody.
My team and I did this. And or this is, I had an idea. Thank goodness I had a wonderful team to support me.
Brilliant. Absolutely. And this is especially true in situations where there's ambiguity. And when in situations like that, what happens is the credit could go to anyone, right? When you don't have clarity around roles and responsibilities, and when you don't re-emphasize what your role is and where you succeeded, and maybe even if you failed, where you failed, because then you can own that as well. But the important thing is not to take ownership for the failure of others or give away the successes that you've had. And the only way of doing it is to communicate very clearly what your contribution was. And this is the same thing that a lot of women do in their CVs, right? Yeah. We accomplished this. And then the interviewer is like, well, if we did this, what did you do? What was your contribution?
I had a wonderful conversation yesterday, actually, with a senior executive who had been reviewing a resume for a man this time, but saying, lead with what the economic impact was. What was it that, instead of just saying, I supported the team to da, 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 you could say, and we increased our revenue by 50 million over the year because of the adjustments that I made. But lead with the 50 million, not I supported the team and we did it all together, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And when we do that, there's another benefit, is that when you're focused on explaining your contributions in terms of numbers and economic outcomes, you start to drive your decision-making around where you want to invest your time, around things that are tangible. And I can give you a really good example of this that I experienced in my own career.
Yeah.
My boss suggested that I work on culture, setting up the culture for the team as like a side, volunteering project. And there I went, spent hours and hours a week to work on setting up this new department's culture. When it came time for the performance evaluation, she just in general thought I had done exceptional work with the culture, but also with my normal job. And when she went to defend my high, performance review with the senior management, they said, well, culture is not work. That's not relevant. I'm not going to give her a good rating because she worked on culture.
Yeah.
And we miss that sometimes because as women, we're the ones who become the party organizers, the birthday recognition people, we volunteer for all sorts of things that don't lead to numbers.
Yeah.
Give us something that we can actually use to argue how we added value to the organization.
Yeah. Several years ago, there was a big article in the Wall Street Journal about why there are so few female CEOs. And the advice they all got was early in your career, make sure that you have some responsibility for the sales numbers, for the profit and loss. And ask for a position, not the easy, comfy, keep people happy ones in marketing or HR and so forth, which might be the fun part, but ask to have a role where you're responsible for generating sales, because that's what counts.
It's tangible.
Maybe that's, and I think that is what still counts, where culture, it's becoming more and more accepted that, the soft skills, quote unquote, means that they don't really count. But how important culture is, I guess, if you can put it in the context of culture really matters for the current generations of workers, because if they're unhappy, they'll just leave. And what's the expense to the company to lose a worker or to have the whole team quit?
You could argue it in some ways, but it will never be as powerful as I generated this much money for the company.
Right.
Or I saved this much money for the company. Right.
It is, I think this is an evolving problem, an evolving project. Tell us more how you would approach claiming credit for your achievements. Or what do you tell your clients?
Yes. Well, of course, we don't want to, the main concern for most women is, I want to be humble. Let's be humble leaders. Let's be servant leaders. Let's acknowledge others. And that's how it needs to be done. However, again, we know that doesn't work. But we don't want to brag in a way that is too obvious either.
Yes.
Because yes, we do have the likability penalty. We have to take that into consideration, the double bind. So what I suggest is, and I actually have a blog post on this, a couple of things. You don't have to judge yourself. Like you said, share the outcome and share the impact. That you're not saying, I did amazing, look at what I did. You're saying, I generated this amount of revenue or clients, or I saved this amount, or I hired this many people for, or I settled this deal. You give the numbers, you give then the context, and then you share why that matters. In the case of culture, I worked on culture. Great. Let's explain, like you shared, why that matters. And you're not saying, oh, this is more important than anybody in what other people did, or look how amazing I am because I did this. You're really adding no judgment to it. You're just explaining exactly what you accomplished, and then allowing other people to judge that. And one of the things that I learned early in my career, luckily, I had a boss who worked in Saudi Arabia, and I was in Dubai. And so we didn't see each other that much. And he wanted to know what I was doing. And so he asked me every day to send him an email at the end of my working day that stated what I achieved, what I needed from him, right, to do my job well, and if there were any other roadblocks in the way, and what was my plan for the next day. And then later in another job, the CEO asked the entire organization to do that on a weekly basis, to say, okay, what have you achieved, and then in bullet points with numbers, something that he could roll up all the way, up to the board, essentially, and in all levels have a clear indication every week of what was happening in the organization. And then I adopted this with my team as well. And I said, hey, this is great for you because you can keep track of what's happening with your own accomplishments. It'll make you feel good and accomplished, but also you can directly plug this into your CV. And not only that, you're helping your boss promote your work, because
Correct.
it's really hard for the manager to know what you're doing. And if you give it to them, like the exact script that they can use with their boss, you're going to make them look good. And then they're going to be able to say, hey, this came from, Elizabeth. And so you're helping them, you're helping yourself, you're helping the organization. Why wouldn't you do it that way?
I call that the weekly update email. And I learned it from the wonderful Cindy Solomon. I actually learned it from my dad, but because, it was my dad, I didn't take it seriously, and then had to do it other times. But the key to that is always do it in a Word document and keep it so that you can go back and say, oh, right. Last month, I did this really amazing thing. And I'd forgotten because there have been so many fires to put out since then. And yeah, right. We did this really amazing thing. My part of it was da, 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 da. Ivna, this has been wonderful. This is full of useful information. I will put links to your podcast in our show notes. For someone who's still struggling with how to be assertive rather than aggressive, where could we start? Leave us with one thing to start on.
The first thing you need to do, I'm going to give you step one and step number two. The first thing you need to understand is that assertiveness is going to be good for you and it's going to help you. And I invite you to explore what that actually looks like and feels like. Because while you're thinking that assertiveness is not your personality, not suited to you, it's aggressive, it's going to make you look bad, you'll never be able to be assertive, right? You don't have the motivation to be assertive. So look to understand what it actually means and what it could mean for you. And then second, once you have that shift in mindset, I would say, try it out. Don't wait.
Yes.
Start now, start immediately, because the moment you have an assertive conversation is the moment you're going to start to change your life, like it did with me. It changed my professional life, but also my personal life. And it's one of those things, like most communication skills, that you get immediate benefit from it.
Yeah. And, even if somebody is upset, no one dies. It's not, try it and try it again and try it again until you figure out what works for you and what is getting you the results.
Exactly. This is a little bit of trial and error with some knowledge, but experiment new ways of being you, which could be the assertive you.
Yeah. Wonderful. Ivna Curi, thank you so very much for coming to Speakers Who Get Results. I enjoy your podcast a great deal, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you. I'm sure we will do more of this as time goes on. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and let me remind you that if you're curious where your presentation skills are strong and where you might need a little help, you can take our free 4-minute assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where you're strong in your presentation skills and where perhaps a little bit of support could get you the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. Thank you for listening. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.